Well, hello. I wanted to come on today, take a few moments and share some things, also give you an important update. I should have been a little bit more consistent in follow up and giving updates here on social media. Forgive me for not doing that, but it's been a very distracting season to say the least. But right now I want to share some things with you, give you an update in regards to my most recent family court battle with my ex-wife and the many false accusations that have been put out there. And I know there's been false accusations put out there because of the many motions that she has filed with the courts, leading up to this hearing. And so I'm going to address some lies. Maybe you're wondering, Pastor Rob, why are you coming on social media and talking about private things? Shouldn't you just keep this private? Well, I'm not keeping it private because it's already been made public. You see, everything that my ex-wife has filed with the courts, she's already spoken to many groups of people prior going to the courts, and I know that for a fact. And I know we've also been taught in the church that, we're not supposed to defend ourselves as Christians. God's the one to defend ourselves. And all I can say about that is mostly not true. And my wife and I are going to come back on social media. We'll probably share some things about this, some of the things that we've learned in the past about staying silent, when to speak up, and also your right to defend yourself in the face of spoken lies and false accusations. And so you see, lies and false accusations, when they're not addressed, they basically just grow. They grow and grow and grow. The longer they stay out there, the longer that they're spoken, until these lies grow so much that the enemy is really on a fast track. And he's heading to destroy your life and discredit you. And so when lies go unchecked and truth is not spoken to expose it, usually a narrative is created in the court of public opinion. This isn't the natural judicial court. I'm talking about the court of public opinion. There's a natural court where we work out disputes with a judge, but then there's also a court of public opinion. And so it's time that we expose some lies and also maybe expose some people that have joined and attached to those lies and are also helping perpetuate them. Anyway, I need to give you a little history to bring some context. First of all, this battle with my ex-wife has literally been a continual battle since 2008 when we got divorced. And I literally have spent over $250,000 on attorney fees since our divorce. Let me explain it and kind of break it down a little bit. When I got divorced in 2008, first thing I want to say is that we didn't use separate attorneys to fight this divorce out. We used a mediator. And I want to say right off the bat that one of my biggest regrets was that I didn't hire my own counsel so that I could fight for a fair agreement. Using mediation really worked against me. There was nothing in the divorce agreement that we made with this mediator that was beneficial to me. Everything was beneficial and slanted towards my ex-wife. Not to mention, I really agreed with everything, so it was partly my fault. I want to give you some detail on our agreement, only because it was a big part of our hearing. So when we got divorced, I agreed to pay my ex-wife 40% of my gross income from NLCF, the church we were part of, for 19 years. For 19 years, I was to pay 40% of my gross income. And if she got remarried, that 40% gross would drop to 40% net. But I would still be paying alimony, even after she remarried. The terms of the agreement for the alimony basically was for 19 years or when two conditions were met. She would be remarried, and I would no longer be employed or solely employed by NLCF. If those two conditions were met, according to our agreement, the alimony would cease. It would stop. Okay? She would have to get married, and I would no longer solely be working for NLCF. Keep that in your mind. We'll get back to that later. I also agreed that she would get the wrongful death lawsuit of her son when it settled. And I want to bring something up right here regarding my son and regarding me. First of all, that was my son as well. And I loved my son more than life. Like, I really, really loved him and had a good relationship with him. He was only 7 years old, but we spent a lot of time together, and I loved him more than life. And you see, my response to his death was not the same response that my ex-wife had. I'm not trying to talk for my ex-wife, but I could just share some of these things, and some of you that knew us know this. My response and the way that I processed his death was very different. In fact, the opposite of the way my ex-wife processed his death. Again, I'm not trying to demonize anybody here. We had different ways of processing. We were very, very different. I'm an introvert. And because I'm an introvert, the death of my son made me literally descend into a very dark pit. I withdrew. I went very inward. I was very private about my pain. I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to avoid conversations. I wanted to avoid anything that would trigger memories. I really, really was in a very, very dark place. And I suffered, literally suffered, cried for months and months and months and months every single day. And it was a suffering beyond description. My ex-wife, on the other hand, she was an extrovert, and she processed everything outwardly. But because of the way that I processed, and I was private, and I was quiet, and I wasn't out in the public always talking about my son and his death and, all this kind of stuff, I was accused of really not loving my son or having a deep love for him, because I never talked about him. I never was posting his pictures on social media and celebrating his birthday in public. I didn't do that type of stuff. And I think because I didn't do it, people kind of read me wrong. I believe that she used that in a way that worked against me, because I wasn't actively involved in the lawsuit case like she was. She felt that because she was the one who did the legwork and that she was the one who was out there in the public and she is the one that worked with the attorneys, that she was entitled to receive the settlement of the wrongful death lawsuit. And so the lawsuit did settle. It settled for $1.2 million. And she got $1.2 million gross. And I got a few $1,000s at the end of the day. And even out of the money I got, so there were some other payments that had to come out of it. And I really ended up with almost nothing. And so about a year after our divorce, in December 2009, the house was supposed to be sold in 2 years. Let's fast forward to this most recent court hearing. Let me start off by saying this. Before NBCC sold its building in 2022, for the last year that we were in Connecticut, I was in another court battle with my ex-wife, and this had to do with extraordinary expenses for our daughter while she was in school, from kindergarten to high school. And Elaine was claiming and suing me for close to $250,000 claiming that I didn't participate with extraordinary expenses for that whole time she was in school. A long story short, that case concluded right before we left for Texas. I won the case because there were certain conditions that had to be met and agreed upon before we would come together with any extraordinary expenses. Long story short, I did pay many extraordinary expenses when I could, and when we agreed on it together in advance, I made those payments, and I took care of my responsibility on that end. But anyway, I won the case, and she got nothing, and she had to end up paying for some of the lawyer fees as well. And so this ruling came out, the ruling for that came out, that we finished off in Connecticut. It came while we were in Texas, the first month we were in Texas. And so right after that ruling came out, it was just a relief, a breath of fresh air. It was a long, grueling season, many, many months, probably over a year of being in court. And it was just very, very daunting. Okay. So right when that was closed, again, in the first few weeks that we were in Texas and we got the news, my ex-wife immediately filed 4 more motions with the court. And every motion was filled with either lies or grossly inflated and exaggerated information. And everything that she wrote in these motions really were to make me look like a monster and an abuser, a deadbeat dad, a corrupt minister with one main scheme, and that was to destroy her. She portrayed herself as the damsel in distress who was taken advantage of since 2008. She was a single parent who raised her daughter alone. She was thrown out on the streets, defrauded, destitute, defenseless, homeless, even living in her car. All of these things were written about her condition and what I did to her. Now, everyone who knows my ex knows how my ex-wife lived, even how she continued to live after our divorce. She was always taken care of financially. She wasn't hurting for any money. And she also was a professional student with multiple degrees in many different things. But yet, she never secured a job. She lived extremely well on the alimony and child support that I was providing for her. And I'm being accused of being greedy. I'm being accused of being money hungry. And even worse than that is, I'm not the only one being accused. My new wife is being accused of being money hungry, a manipulator, and a thief. Now, anyone who knew me and my ex while we were married, you know our lifestyle and the way that we lived. And if you knew me and my new wife when we got married, you know our lifestyle was very different than the lifestyle of me and my ex. You see, my new wife is very different, and that's why. She's modest. She's not entitled. She's not a showboat. She's not a spendthrift. I mean, even in the church, in the departments that she worked in, anyone who worked with my wife in the church knows she was always thinking about the money and what it's going to cost and how we can conserve. Even ask our accountant, if you ever bump into her, and some of you know who she is, how many times did my wife request funds for something that she was involved in? Maybe a handful of times. And to try to pin her as being the greedy one who was part of our laundering money scheme to defraud my ex of alimony, this is really horrible. This is an outright Leviathan demon. Very, very twisted. When I remarried, my new wife and I, we lived in beat up and run down apartments. We moved 3 different times in 2 years. First 2 years that we were married, into different apartments. And finally, at the very end of 2013, almost 6 years after we got married, my wife and I had an opportunity to buy a little fix-me-up house, 2,500 square feet, in the woods of Weston, Connecticut. Now, we were able to do a slight renovation to make it livable. I mean, it was really in very, very poor, beat up condition. And we had to make it livable to move into. So we got some volunteers from the church. No professional people were hired except one taper that was hired to do some of the taping. Everybody else was volunteers, giving a hand and trying to fix this thing up so that we could move in and live in it as our first house. Meanwhile, my ex is living in a 7,400 square foot house. Keep that in mind. And I only bring this up because of the narrative that's been created in the motion she files and in the court of public opinion. So back to the motions she filed against me. What she never mentions in her many motions and briefs that she filed with the church was that she was the one who committed adultery, not me. And she also never brings up that when she left the church, she left me a fractured church that was in an upheaval. It wasn't a healthy, thriving church of 5,000 people like she writes in her motions and in her briefs. 5,000 people, several thousand, up to 5,000 people attending the church. All lies, all exaggerations. I don't know why she felt the need to do that. She felt the need to do it because she's trying to promote the church that she built through her worship ministry. And so it wasn't a healthy, thriving church of 5,000 people. The most we ever had in one service was about 1,100 people. But that's where we peaked out at, and it typically was around between 500 and 700 people during the best of its time with church growth. She built the church to 5,000 people attending. We never had 5,000 people. We never even consistently had 1,000 people. We maxed out at 1,000 people, but our average attendance was about 500, 600 people. We only had 600 chairs in the church. But anyway, she never left me a healthy church. She also never mentioned in her motions that when she left the church, she really never left the church. And what I mean by that is she kept in touch with a lot of people that were in the church, with people who left the church, people who might have gotten offended in the church and left on a bad note. She would stay in touch with these people. And even to the place where a couple of times I know she had a lot of these people over to her house. One time she had a Christmas NBCC party at her house. And you had the praise and worship team there, people from the choir, other people she had relationship with in the church. And I don't know about you, but that's just not right. When she left the church, she should have left the church and not kept her sticky fingers in the church, causing problems. And anyway, she also never mentions how she aligned herself with my offended son and daughter-in-law, who also left the church. And that's a whole nother story. You'll hear more about that another time. But I want to give you some specifics in these motions. Both my wife and I were accused of being corrupt and fraudulent. And I'm taking this, word for word out of the motions. We were corrupt and fraudulent people. She also accused both of us of laundering money, devising a scheme of funneling income for 15 years through my new wife's salary when she was hired in as a graphic designer in order to defraud her of her alimony. So she accused my wife of being a sham employee. You know what that means? Your employee is a fake employment. It's a mock employment. It's not legitimate. Basically, she was saying she was never called of God. She didn't have a calling of God in her life. There's no place or no value that she can contribute to the ministry. She doesn't deserve to be an employee. There's no place for her. She only has one means, and it is to defraud my ex-wife of alimony. That's how my wife was portrayed to the courts. over and over and over again. And my ex-wife was seeking 40% of my wife's salary going back to 2008. Now we're in court this past 2024. She wants to seek 40 because my wife was a sham employee. I mean, this is really horrible. Because she was a sham employee only used to funnel money through so we could defraud my ex of her alimony, her rightful alimony that she should be getting. And see, one of the problems with my ex, she had a problem with being entitled. And now she's asking the court to give her 40% of my wife's salary since 2008 to 2022 when we closed the church. And it belonged to her because her employment was a sham. Also, she was seeking from the courts, I'm just giving you a handful of things, she wanted 40% of our Pastor Appreciation Day offerings. Now, most people who go to church, you know that there's usually one day out of a year that there's a time for the church and they celebrate and honor their pastors and they take an offering and they, do some special things. And it's really nice and it's honoring and it's always good for the congregation and it's a blessing for the pastors as well. Pastor Appreciation Day was always in the summer, and they'd celebrate Pastor Appreciation Day and both of our birthdays at the same time. And during Pastor Appreciation Day, there was a time in the service when they would receive a gift from the congregation, a financial gift, as a symbol of honor, and give it to the pastors. And so we would receive these love gifts, not from NBCC, we would receive them from the individuals that were part of the church, and they would give us a personal offering. So when I heard that she was seeking 40% of our Pastor Appreciation Birthday offering, I mean, why don't you just come over our house and walk into our house on Christmas Day and walk over to the Christmas tree and just take as many gifts as you want under the Christmas tree because you're entitled to it. I mean, that's really what I thought it was like, to take 40% of gifts that were given to us from the congregation. That's absolutely insane. And there were many other lies that had been spread as well to many other people. And I don't have enough time to go through everything, but I want to bring out an example of something that was brought up in the court. You see, at the end of 2013, after close to 6 years of being married to my new wife, we were able to purchase a home. But in order to purchase that home, man, we had to unload everything. And we had to jump through a lot of hoops. I mean, I sold everything I owned. At that time, I did have a second car that I had for years, even when I was married to my ex. It was a Mini Cooper, and I was going to keep that for my daughter, but because we wanted to get into a house, I had to sell everything. I sold my car. I had a motorcycle that I sold. I pawned gold jewelry that I had. We had several tag sales, my new wife and I. I cashed out whatever I had in my retirement fund. I mean, we literally scraped and scrounged to get a down payment so that we would qualify for a mortgage. And during that time, there was a small temporary increase to my wife's salary. And my accountant had testified of this because she remembers it when she was in the church. And again, we're talking about in 2013. My wife received a temporary small increase to her salary. And again, it was temporary. And I'm going to give you the reason why, and I'm going to be very honest. I don't remember, all the scenarios and details around it. But during that time, we applied for a mortgage. And all the calculations were in. And we saw, my wife and I knew that we could afford the payment on the mortgage that was quoted to us. But the lender was not going to give us the mortgage because of two reasons. Number one, there was too much a debt to income ratio. Now, why was there a lot more debt than my income can handle? Because my name was still on the mortgage or the two mortgages of the house that I deeded over to my ex-wife. The house that was supposed to be sold or refied after 2 years so that my name wasn't in the mortgage anymore. And that was back in 2009, 10, and 11. Here's 2013. And because my name is still on the mortgage, it affected my credit pretty bad. Also, my credit was damaged because my ex-wife had stopped making the payment on the second mortgage. So my credit got hit pretty hard. And so we had to also pay money to repair my credit, so on and so forth. And so because we didn't meet debt to income ratio, my wife was given by the church a small and temporary increase in her salary, and it helped us to meet that ratio. And when the lender saw that the debt to income ratio balanced out, they gave us the mortgage, released the mortgage, and the increase got reverted and it stopped. No longer was she getting that increase. So she did get the increase for a couple of months, maybe 3-4 months. And when we got the mortgage, the increase stopped. And that was always the plan. So again, after jumping through several hoops, we finally had our own home after 6 years of being married. My daughter now had a small little room that she could call her own when she came to stay over our house. Before this, they were staying, Jael and Caden were staying in the same room in the 3 apartments that we were part of, and even living in bunk beds. So now she's able to have her own room. We have a room for Jace, a separate room for Caden, and life was good in our little house in Weston. And so what gets me real mad, though, is that this information of this temporary increase in 2013 somehow got over to my ex-wife. And I wonder how. Who would have given her that information? Well, it was obviously somebody that was close to me. Well, she called Dennis LeBay on the stand to confirm. See, Dennis LeBay was my assistant at the time in 2013. And he had knowledge, he was privy of this temporary increase that my wife got. And during that time, we were able to secure a mortgage and buy our house in Weston. He was privy to that. So maybe it was he that gave that information over to Elaine, because Elaine called him in as a witness to testify about this increase that my new wife got as an employee in NBCC, as if that was like against the law. She was an employee in her own right, and she got an increase, and she always got commensurated with her pay according to the work that she did. In other words, she got a salary in relation to what she did. Even with this little increase that she got over the period of 3 or 4 months, didn't change anything. She still was getting paid in commensurate to the job that she was performing. And so this information, private information, has nothing to do with my salary. This is my wife's salary. As if she can't get a raise, as if she can't get an increase. And this information gets put over to Elaine, and Elaine wants to use this in court. And Dennis LeBay comes in, my former associate, comes in and testifies that it is true that Pastor Gail did get a temporary increase, and it helped them get a mortgage so that they could buy a house. Who cares? What's the big deal? Had nothing to do with my salary. Oh, are you saying I should have got the increase? Is Elaine saying that you should have got the increase, Rob, so that you would pay me 40% of that increase and my alimony. It wasn't right that your wife, as an employee of the church, had gotten a temporary increase. That money should have gone to you. Man, I don't know about you, but this is working me up just sharing about it. Anyway, somebody gave that private information about one of the employees in the church. It got to my ex-wife. Maybe it was Dennis, or maybe it was Beth Heslin at the time, because she was one of the board members. She wasn't working for me in that moment, but she was one of the board members on our board. So she was privy of the same thing. Anyway, that was pretty snaky and ratty that you would go and share that information with Elaine that really meant nothing. At the end of the day, in this court battle, it literally meant nothing. Anyway, I want to continue, and I want to go into the courtroom for a moment. With every court date that we went, and there were months we were in court. So anyway, so let me see, 3, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 court hearings, 8 court hearings that we had total, 8 or 9. Every court date, my ex-wife shows up with an entourage of people. I was shocked. And many of those were old members of NLCF that she stayed in contact with. I'll give you some of the names. Huey Askew, who I had to fire. No, there's a lot we could talk about with him. Linda Dunn, she was Huey's sister. She was always there. Rita Valentine, good old faithful Rita. Rita was in the courtroom supporting Elaine. Rita's son, John Valentine, as well. There were a couple other ladies that went way back when they were part of the NLCF days. And they would come in and they would be Elaine's support. And they were there, heard every detail of everything that was, I mean, I know it's a public court and anybody could come to a public hearing. But again, it shows the people that she was staying in relationship with that were ex-members of the church. And so for 3 days, I'm just giving you 3 days, I was on the stand, and for 3 days, she was trying to prove to the courts that I was a thief, that I was dishonest and a corrupt person, stealing money from the church that really doesn't belong to me. And so the way that she was trying to do this is she ended up getting the church records. That's a whole nother story how she got them, because she got them illegally, but they were allowed to come into the courts. She got NBCC's checking account and savings account records for, I think it might have been the last year of NBCC, 2022. Maybe it was, no, I think it was 2021, half of 2021, 2021, and 2022. So she got those records in her hand, unredacted, a private company. She got all the private information, unredacted, okay? Then she also gets, from me, she also gets all of my income. She gets my checking account for 4 years, my checking account, my savings account, any other accounts that I have money in, any other banks that I deal with, my credit card accounts, any credit cards that I had. She gets all the statements of those. And what she tried to do for 3 days while I was on the stand, drilling me with these numbers and trying to show that there's money that comes out of the NBCC checking account, but nobody knows where it goes. But on the same date or close to that date, there's a deposit in my account, and the deposit in my account, maybe it was a large sum of money. She was trying to piecemeal, is this the money that came from the NBCC account? And for 3 days, we were going back and forth from the church account in Connecticut to my personal account and my joint account, like my wife's account as well. Her accounts, she's on the credit cards, she's on my joint checking account, and she's examining every detail, and there are times in these statements where I shift money from different accounts. Everybody does. I put money in the savings account. Then when I need it in the checking account, I'll take money out of the checking account, the savings account, and I'll put it in the checking account, and I'll pay bills, or if we needed to make a larger purchase, and I would move money around. And she would see some of those exchanges going on, saying, where did this money come from? Where did this money come from? Where did that money come from? Where did you get that money? Meanwhile, I already had a partial inheritance from my mother dying in 2023. My mom died, and she gave all of her children an inheritance. And I had a portion of it, not all of it, but I had a portion of it in my account. We also sold 2 houses in a 2-year time frame, the one in Weston, then the one in Norwalk. We sold both of those houses, and because the market was good, we made some good money on both of the sales of those houses. So that money was in my account, and she's questioning me, how did you get so much money in your account? Where did this money come from? And for 3 days, she's trying to connect something together to show that there's something here where he is taking money that he shouldn't get, and he's putting it here, and everything that she is questioning has an answer to. And even my accountant got up the things that I couldn't answer because, by the way, I've never looked at, and I don't know if this is right or not, I've never put my eyes on a bank account or a statement from the bank from our NBCC or NLCF church the whole time that I was a pastor for 30 some odd years. I didn't have to. We had capable people that were running with this, overseeing it, providing fiscal accountability and responsibility. We had the best accountant in the world working with us for years, since 2007, I think, all the way up until we left to Texas. And there was accountability. I never had to go into it. She always took care of things. And because I didn't know what was on a lot of these statements from the church, I couldn't answer them. But my accountant could answer them. And so all of the questions were answered. There was never a time that she proved to the courts that there was a deposit from the church that came into my account that shouldn't have, or that wasn't a valid deposit. There was always proof of everything that came into my account. There was never proof. At the end of the day, she never proved anything that I was dishonest, that I was a thief, that I stole money from somebody that it didn't belong to, that it belonged to. She could never prove that, not one bit, that I stole money from anywhere. Why? Because I didn't. Why? Because I said over and over and over, every time I could talk in the court, Elaine, you're trying to make me look like a thief. I'm not a thief, and you know I'm not a thief. You know that I am not a thief. And at the end of the day, it was never proven true. And 3 full days were being used to try to prove that I was a thief. It was never proven to be true. But she still had access to all these details because she accused me of stealing, and accused me of being a thief, and accused me of hiding money and funneling money into my account that doesn't belong to me. But it was never proven. But she still saw all of these details, and all of these details were brought out in the public, basically, to everybody who was sitting in the courtroom and to anybody else that she talks to outside of the courts. That's the court of public opinion. And so in the court of public opinion, the lies that were being spoken were that my wife and I are frauds. We funnel money. We're stealing money from the church. We're defrauding Elaine, or trying to defraud her, since 2008, with my wife having a sham employment. And the list goes on and on and on. And that's why we're here, to straighten out some of these lies. Now, let's move on a little bit more. We're going to talk for a moment about the sale of the building. Just hold on for 1 second. Okay, we're going to talk about the sale of the building. Now, in future videos, when I'm with my wife, we'll talk more about some of the whys. Why did we have to sell the building? Why did we have to shut down the ministry? There's several dynamics, but we'll get into that at another time, and you could tune in if you like to have that information. And so for years, we were struggling financially to keep the operations running. We were constantly implementing spending freezes. Ask anybody who was on staff, they hear the word spending freeze. In other words, somebody needs money for something. Nope. The accountant says we are under a spending freeze. We're trying to pay the mortgage, and we're trying to keep people employed, and trying to keep the building open and the lights on so that we could continue to have services. And so in 2002, what happened is it got really to a bad place financially, and we were in jeopardy of going into a default on our mortgage. And so we had to move very quickly with changes just to keep the doors open and to keep the services going. And basically we were going through, we could call a financial restructuring, and it was happening across the board. And we made all kinds of cuts. We made cuts in our office operation. In other words, instead of being opened 4 days out of the week, we were only open 2 days out of the week. And in doing so, we saved on lights and gas and water and all of our utility bills. And our utility bills was steep. If I can remember, like a good $7,500 a month just on utility bills. So we not only cut operations, we also cut salaries. We also cut staff positions several times until we chiseled it down to a skeleton staff. And you would know what that is if you're trying to keep a business open that is falling financially. So we finally got a skeleton staff just to keep the services running. And then it got really bad, and the day came that I had to tell my wife that we need to sell the building. You know, both of us cried that day. We did. And it wasn't an easy thing. It was heavy. And it was oppressive to come to this grueling reality that we are selling this building. And you see, it's not fair to dismiss what me and my wife were going through. I don't remember one moment when anybody asked me or my wife, wow, man, that's got to be rough. How does that feel? That all these years, and you're going to be closing down this church, and you have to sell this beautiful building that we renovated, we spent so many years in, and we have to come to the place where we're selling it. It wasn't something that was fun. I mean, what we went through spiritually, mentally, emotionally, it was taxing on us as human beings. I mean, it was heavy. And another thing I want to throw out there, we never wanted to lose that building, and we never wanted to leave Connecticut. We planned on staying in Connecticut, and it's just insane that these lies have been being spread like this. Relocation to Texas, I mean, the way that my ex-wife portrays this was all part of the plan since we got married, me and my new wife. That it would all come to this where we would sell the building and we would relocate and we would live off of that money. That's the lie that was being perpetuated. We never wanted to leave Connecticut. In fact, I did come out and tell the congregation, we're not going nowhere. We'll rent a facility. We'll rent a hotel. Until the plan changed eventually when we realized we're never going to succeed in Connecticut. Not with everything that has happened. Not with all the craziness, all the slander, all the attacks, people trying to destroy my wife, the lies that were spoken about both of us, the things, and we are going to get into a lot of these issues, and we're going to bring them out into the light so that everybody could see it and you can make a decision yourself. And so when we realized that we had to relocate to Texas, there was nothing fun about that either. We felt like Texas was really the place we were supposed to go. There was also a couple that came down to Texas at the same time that we knew that were in the church that we were supposed to do our startup church with, but it just didn't work out that well. And we kind of parted our ways. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, moving to Texas was very, very hard and difficult to uproot my life and uproot my family and uproot my son and my stepson and Jace just being in elementary, finishing up elementary school and had all his friends. He hated that we had to move. And we did move to Texas, okay? When the court ruling came in, now we're kind of winding this down. Let me explain that to you, but I have to first say this. In the last phase of the cuts in Connecticut during this financial reconstructing, there was a decision that was made in how the cuts were going to have to take place, the amount of money we need to have in order to operate. And this is before we even put the building on the market, or we knew we were going to sell the building. But it was our last-ditch effort to keep this thing afloat. And so there were cuts that were being made across the board, like I rattled off to you. And my accountant came to me, who was also one of the trustees, and recommended to us that in all of these cuts that we're doing, when it came to myself and my wife, that number one, my housing allowance, because I got a salary and I also had a housing allowance. Pastors understand what that is. My housing allowance would get nixed for me. And my wife's salary that she was getting at that time would be cut. And I think it was like 40%. And because my wife was also a minister at the time, she would be able to qualify for the housing allowance. And so the housing allowance now, my wife has a housing allowance and she has a salary, but it's 40% less of the salary that she was earning in the ministry. My cut was my housing allowance. And so, I'm going to say that all over. And so it was recommended by our accountant, who was always, and also a trustee member, the treasurer of our board, that in addition to all the cuts that we're doing, she had everything on paper, that when it came to our cuts, that she was going to cut my housing allowance, and Gail's salary was going to be cut. I think it was about 40% decrease in her salary. But because Gail was also a minister on staff, she would qualify for the housing allowance, so that housing allowance would go to my wife. So when these changes were made, when my wife's salary was cut like that, there was a 40% savings of her salary, plus there was a savings on the, what is it called? The FICA taxes. And so the savings came out to about $26,000 just with her cuts in these transitions. And so I say all that, to say that I didn't make this decision. This idea didn't come from me. This wasn't part of a scheme to defraud my ex-wife. These were necessary cuts that needed to be made to save as much money as we can to keep this ministry afloat. We always had it in our head, pretty soon this building's probably going to have to be put on the market. But we're trying to help it so it doesn't go there. And so unfortunately, here's what I want to say. Because my housing allowance was cut from me, that my alimony got reduced. And my alimony did change substantially. And I've started making the new payments on what I was now getting paid as an employee here at NBCC. And so it needs to be said, very important that I put this out here, because there's just a lot of crazy stuff going on. My wife had no say in this matter. And I'm not only going to say it that way, I'm going to say my wife really was never involved in any financial decisions that were made in the church. She always heard after the fact. She was never involved in decisions with the board. She was never at any board meeting. She was never, giving her ideas or her opinions on any financial decisions that were made. And even when this decision was made, not by me, I did not make this decision. I didn't initiate it. I didn't come up with the financial reconstruction plan. This decision was made by a professional accountant and a trustee member. And it was a decision that had to take place in order to make the appropriate cuts to keep the building open, or at least buy some time. And so I want to make it clear, my wife had nothing to do with any of this, because I came home and said, basically, babe, this is what was recommended. This is what needs to be done in order to keep the church doors open and keep us afloat a little bit longer. So, in addition, I need to say this. My last paycheck from the Connecticut church was September 15th, 2022. I want to go back to the requirements that have to be met in order for alimony to stop being paid. So alimony was to be given from my proceeds from NBCC or NLCF for 19 years on my gross income until my ex got married. Then it would go to net income. The term of the alimony was 19 years, or if I solely was no longer working for NBCC. If these two conditions were met, she was remarried and I was no longer solely working for NBCC, that the alimony would stop. It could be self-executing, and then it needs to be formalized by the courts. So I also want to say that my last paycheck from the Connecticut church was September 15th, 2022. And so it gets me to this point right here. The two requirements were met for me to stop paying alimony. The two requirements were that my ex would be remarried, which she was at the time of my last paycheck, and I no longer was primarily employed by NBCC. If those two conditions were met, it was self-executing. In other words, I could stop immediately with the alimony, and I just needed to file it and formalize it with the courts. And so now let's get to the court ruling. Here's the court ruling. The court ruled because the funds from the sale of the building in Connecticut was donated to the new nonprofit in Texas, which when it comes to a nonprofit or 501c3, it has to be donated to another nonprofit. You can't just give it to another corporation or something. It has to stay in the context of a nonprofit organization. We had started up a new nonprofit in Texas, Sweetwater Worship Center, Inc., and we have our 501c currently. When we were going through court, it was filed, but we hadn't gotten it yet. Long story short, it came in. We got our 501c. That actually, they gave us the federal government gave us a 501c3 from the day we formed Sweetwater Worship Center, Inc. So the 501c3 started when our formation was complete, for the record. So we are a 501c3. The money from the sale of the building of the nonprofit in Connecticut was donated to the nonprofit in Texas, who had a different 501c3, a different EIN number. It was a different organization. And I was now being employed by Sweetwater Worship Center, Inc. in Texas. But the judge made a rule saying because it's the same money that came from NBCC that went to the Sweetwater new 501c3 in Texas, she's looking at this and saying this is a continuation of the ministries. That I don't understand. It's a continuation of the ministries when we're a different ministry and a different EIN number and a different 501c3 number, a different church name number. But because she saw the money was donated to this new organization in Texas, and because we still had the same board members, that's another piece, the same board members. By the way, the board members weren't going to get changed out while we were in the middle of a hearing that had to be settled. The board members stayed intact so that we could get through this hearing together, as it was also part of NBCC, not just me personally. And so because the same board members were the same board members of the new formation, and because the money was donated from that church to this new corporation, the judge ruled that she sees that as a continuation of churches. She's basically saying that this is a continuation of the church in Connecticut. I don't know how you could say that. None of the people that attend that church attend this new ministry. It's a different 501c3, but that's the way she ruled. Because it was the same money, and at that time it was the same board members, that she saw it as a continuation. So what that means is that her alimony was going to continue. And so the ruling was that alimony continues. It's resumed alimony, and it continues for the next year and 4 months, which now is a year and 2 months. That alimony continues. And whatever it was when, the other thing was that when I took the cut of my housing allowance and my wife took her salary cut, and because the housing allowance went to her, she put in her ruling that I, Robert Cassara, manipulated the housing allowance, and it went to my wife, and it shouldn't have been taken away from me. And so I didn't manipulate anything. That wasn't my decision. That was a business decision that was handed to me and said, these are the changes that we need to make. They voted on it. I didn't even vote on the decision. I abstained from the vote, because anytime there's votes going on that has to do with my salary, we're not supposed to be part of that decision. And so I abstained from the vote. But the judge said, because for that 1 year, it was 1 year, from middle of 2021 to the middle of 2022, my wife received a housing allowance. It was only 12 months. For those 12 months that I didn't have a housing allowance, I have to repay her that in arrearage, as well as continue the alimony for 2.5 years, or 2.25 years. And so that was the ruling. That was the ruling. She got her alimony back for 2 years. She got some arrearage because of that business decision of the cut, how the cuts went and how the board voted on it. And that's what she got. She was also seeking, we'll close with this, she was also seeking $1.3 million she wanted to sue me for damages. $1.3 million. And she had a whole spread list of all of the damages that were done to her over the years since 2008 to current. And she wanted for me, the court, to offer her $1.3 million, or it said what the court deemed fair. Well, the court didn't give her a penny. The only thing she got out of all of this is her alimony resumed for 2 years, and she got the difference of the housing not being part of my salary package. And that's where it ended. And so I hope that clears up some things and sheds some light. It was important for me to do this. And I do want to say as well, my wife and I are going to come out and speak in more detail of the downfall of the church. How could we lose a church like that? And some of the things that had happened that I think that would be very beneficial for people to hear. And some of the things that especially me, I learned as a pastor through this whole process. And we're going to be transparent. We're going to be open. And we're just going to share it all and be out in the open and be honest. So God bless you. And if you stayed with us, you're a champion. Thanks for being with us on this long, long video. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon.